Welcome everybody to a brand new episode of Identity Talk for Educators Live, the show for the unsung heroes of education. I'm your host, Sarfo-Mensah. And if this is your first time tuning in to the podcast, I welcome you and I hope that today's episode is one that will have you coming back for more. And if you're a returning listener or viewer of the podcast, as always, I welcome you back and hope that today's episode is one that you will find informative, enlightening, and as always, insightful. So before we get into the main event, if you are on YouTube, please hit that red subscribe button so you can get future notifications on new episodes of the podcast. If you're listening from Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcast, please make sure you subscribe there as well. And for those who would like to donate to help us continue to grow this platform, there are 4 ways in which you can do that. The first is through Cash App using our handle $IDTALK4ED. If you have a Venmo, you could use our handle @KwameSM. If you have a PayPal account, you can go to the URL paypal.me/KwameSM. And for those who are my day ones, those who have been following Identity Talk for the past 6 years, those who have been benefiting greatly from the content that we've been sharing with the community, please consider becoming a forum member. This is the exclusive membership space for the Identity Talk community. And with this membership, you'll be able to get early episodes of this podcast. You'll be able to get some behind the scenes footage of the podcast, some bonus episodes, as well as some other perks and incentives as a token of our appreciation for your support. To learn more about the membership tiers, you can go to our main website at identitytalkforeducators.com. So make sure you all stop by there. Now, for my readers, listen, if you haven't bought your copy of Learn to Relearn, what are you waiting for? We're about to approach the 1-year anniversary of this book, and this is the gift that has kept on giving. I can't even put into words how appreciative and honored I feel to have so many people dig into this book, share this book with their communities, and to apply the principles that I share in this book. So thank you for everybody who has written a review. Thank you to everybody who has purchased a copy of the book. Thank you to everybody who has done a selfie with the book or have shown support in any form. I appreciate all of it. And if you're someone that still has no idea what I'm talking about, just go to the website, learntorelearn.com, to learn more about the book. And if you're someone that's already read the book and you just haven't done your review yet, please go do your review on Amazon or Goodreads or wherever you write your reviews. All that support is greatly appreciated. Thank you again. All right, people. So I'm so excited about this episode. We're going to be talking about the migration and just the transience of Black people in different global settings. And we've had episodes where we've talked about this, but today's episode is one that I'm excited about because I have a phenomenal guest who's going to be talking about her own experience as a Black woman living in China, and she's going to get into some of the incredible work she's doing there. So I'm not going to waste any more time. Let's bring on today's guest, Nicole Bonnah, who's going to talk with us about her time in China, the justice work she's doing, and everything in between. So let's bring on Nicole. Hello.
Hello.
How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm very good. How are you?
I can't complain. It's early in the morning here, so my day's just getting started.
Okay. It's kind of late-ish afternoon here, so smack bang in the middle of it, but really happy to be here.
Yeah, so I mean, I know we have been talking through social media for some time, so it's great to finally match the voice with the face And that's
Yeah, same here, same here.
yeah. So on this podcast, we always like to start from the beginning, Nicole.
Mhm.
And I know for you, currently you're based in China, but originally you're coming from the UK. So I'd love for you to just share a bit about your childhood early on and what ultimately inspired you to want to do the education work that you're doing today.
Yeah, thank you. Such a great question. I really had to reflect and go back to think about this. And I think when it comes to educators, usually it's somebody, our own experiences, and somebody in the life, in our life when we were in school, are often associated with the reasons why we decide to do what we do. And it was the same for me. So I think most of us either experience in school an area of deficit or an area where we've been affirmed, our abilities have been affirmed and also nurtured by someone. And so for me, it was the nurturing that did it for me, that kind of inspired me to do the work that I do today and to be in the classroom. Um, Academically, I was actually a bit of a late bloomer. It took me a bit of a while to catch up to my peers. And I was the student that was taken out of class for quote unquote like special lessons in math and literacy. And at that time, I was in primary education. And I didn't quite like, I wasn't really cognizant of the reason why I was separated from my peers to do that until I went to secondary school. And I realized that the differences in ability became a lot more visible to me. And I don't know what happened, but a shift happened when I was in about year 8, which I think in US schools is like grade 7. And
That's correct.
yeah, I saw a sudden shift in academically for me anyway. And I think that speaks to the fact that a lot of the time, especially maybe 2 generations before me, children are kind of seen as they should be like carbon copies of each other, right? They should be getting to different milestones at a particular time. But I think we've become more learned and more well versed in how it actually works, how children learn, and how they're blank canvases and they're all very different, very unique. And so I don't know why the shift happened then, but that's when the shift happened for me. And I began to understand and articulate things that even my peers were kind of found challenging to do. And that's when my English literature teacher swept in, and she kind of took me under her wing. She nurtured me. She affirmed my contributions in class. We used to sit at lunch times, like reading together. She introduced me to the classics, and I became well versed on the classics and things like that. And so the experience really showed me the kind of really pivotal role that teachers play in the lives of students. I think often we may not realize the power that we have, just the power of our words to really sow
Yeah.
in like positive words into the lives of students. And that our words, especially in the classroom, can really shift the dynamics or the trajectory of where our students go on, what they go on to do, and what they go on to accomplish and achieve, and even the lane that they find themselves in later life is a lot of the time directly connected to what we're sowing into children in the classroom. And so for me, it was her words, it was her nurturing, her patience with me that really made me think, this is wonderful. This vocation is, which is, it's not a job, it's vocation. It's really, it's edifying. So, and I think, I didn't actually always want to be a teacher. I wanted to be an actress. And I think if I can just
Oh,
share a little
cool.
story with you that, yeah, that is related to the power of words. Usually you can't remember who said certain things to you, but you always, like their name, for example, but you always remember the words, right? And I
Mhm.
was sent to stagecoach school when I was younger. And then in the last stages of my teenage years, I was in theatre school, and I really wanted to act on the stage. And my trainer at the time, my coach, my acting coach at the time, said one sentence to me that changed my life. And all he said was, Nicole, I don't think you're for the stage. I think you're better suited for television. Now, for anybody who's in the arts, if you want to be in theatre and you want to be on stage, something like that is really crushing, to be told by somebody that you're not good enough, you know, that you should go in this direction. And that's exactly what I did. I went in that direction. I stopped stage coaching, and I went to America. I tried to pursue TV. So I just use it as an example of like the power that words have. Someone told me I wasn't, you know, up to it. I wasn't good enough. And then literally the trajectory of where I was going completely shifted. And I ended up, you know, going, you know, on a different course. And I sometimes reflect back and I think, I wonder if I just like push through on that, where possibly I might have gone on the stage. You never know. So yeah, realization, teachers can transform the life, right? The lives of their students. And words are very limiting or they're very liberating.
And it's amazing that you're able to have a teacher that inspired you in that way. And also, I'm already seeing the parallels between my own schooling and yours. So I was in a learning support classroom during my early years of my schooling, and I was able to get out of that setting and go on and do some incredible things, right? So
Right.
I want to ask you about your primary and secondary schooling. And outside of being in that learning support setting, I'm wondering if you had any instances where you may have had struggles to come as your full self, whether it was within the school setting or even outside of that.
I didn't experience any significant struggles at that time anyway, with, for example, identity in school or navigating that. So, you know, I was born and bred in London, UK, and I felt and was seen as British. Right. I grew up in London, which is a very multicultural city. And really, it's more about a London culture rather than anything that shapes identity or shaped identity for me at that stage in my life. So I was a Londoner, I was British. But I do remember thinking, because I've reflected on this in my adulthood, right, on identity and blackness and things like that. And my grandmother, my maternal grandmother, was a part of the Windrush era. I'm not sure if people are familiar with that, but literally the Windrush is a ship, 1948. It brought a lot of
Caribbean.
Caribbean migrants over to the UK to
Yes.
help restore Britain after the Second World War, right? And this migration came started in 1948, well into the 70s, and so my nan was a part of that generation of people. And when I reflected on that, I realized that for a lot of Caribbeans at the time, the motherland wasn't Africa, the motherland wasn't the continent, the motherland was England. That was the narrative that was sold to them. So the
Mhm.
expectation was that they were coming to the UK, that the streets were going to be paved with gold. Mind you, a lot of these Caribbeans were coming from poverty, but they were also coming from really lush green pastures, fresh fruit, the sun, right? And
Yes.
they were expecting this kind of vibrant life, you know, in the UK, and acceptance and open arms. And then they come to the UK and it's cold and it's grey and it's a concrete jungle. And obviously they're met with rife, violent racism daily, and it's not quite what they expected. However, they pushed on in regard to assimilation. The idea is that I'm in the motherland, and now I want to be quintessentially English. I want to embrace what it means to be British. And so when I reflect on this, I always think back to my nan, and I have a very old photo of her, and she's standing next to her TV set, and she's in starched bell bottoms, and she's got like uh, uh, hot combed hair and with curls, you know,
Okay.
and
Yeah.
yeah, and she's surrounded by Britishness. There's not a sign of of uh, of our Caribbean heritage in the house. There's no sign that she's Jamaican, right?
Correct.
And there's no sign of any West African influence. There's no homage to that. And so it made me think about the environment I grew up in and why perhaps I didn't really think about Afrocentrism until much later in my life. I just saw myself as a Black Brit, and people saw me as a Black Brit. But then I would go to like my friend's house, right? Other friends that from the Caribbean or from the continent, and I would see like a very visual representation of where they're from. And I distinctly remember that. I'm not sure how it made me feel at the time. I'd be guessing if I was to try and talk to that. But I do remember seeing that, and that carrying, that being carried with me. Within our home was very, very British, apart from maybe the food that we consume, the things that my parents would prepare for us in the house. And so um, it made me think, okay, I really embraced school life. I embraced my Britishness. But when I started to reflect in later life about that, I thought about the limitations of the curriculum. Yes, I was introduced to the classics. That was great. But I really missed out on a very rich and colorful tapestry of Black and brown authors, and an ability to see myself and the things that I was reading, consuming, and analyzing.
Yes.
And that did make me a bit more like Afrocentric, I guess, and a lot of research and a lot of soul searching. And as a result, I have a 7-year-old son. So I'm quite big on, making sure that he's introduced to Black authors and diverse voices, and kind of creating experiences for him to see himself in the curriculum. But that's the only thing I can speak to in regard to, what it was to grow up in London, and how I looked at identity then and the reasons for that.
Yeah, now when you look at London and the greater UK, there's so much great work going on. I mean, I had Lavinia Sedent on the podcast early on when I started years ago. And this is at the advent of the Black curriculum, the organization that she runs. And it's an incredible organization that's doing a lot of advocacy work around Black British history. And they've just been
Yeah.
able to go many places with that. So shout out to her and so many people within that movement. Brother Akala, like so many.
Yes.
Uh,
Oh my gosh,
we,
he's amazing. Yeah.
yeah, so
And
many.
it's yeah, unbelievable. He's like, I've never met him actually. I'm sure we've been graced like the same spaces. I'm sure we have.
Yeah,
But often, because I've been in China now for like
like
13
over a
years.
decade.
Yeah, over a decade. And
Yeah,
obviously, like you say, like there's been a shit, like such a movement and a shift, right, in regard to like Black Britain in the
yeah.
UK. And I've been like, oh my gosh, like this is what I would have loved to have enjoyed, I didn't really experience that. It was there, right? It was on the periphery. But now it's like really there's a real like uh focus, refocusing, and going on in terms of looking at Black heritage, Black British heritage, and our contributions to British society.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. So you mentioned the fact that you're in China. So what brought you to China in the first place?
Actually, I had just gotten married, and my husband and I really wanted to travel. And we were like, yeah, Asia sounds really cool. Let's do Asia for a year, and then come back and like start a family or something. And we were like, yeah, let's do that. And this is back in 2013. And we were only supposed to come for a year. And all the jobs, I had no interest and no real knowledge about China. It wasn't on the map in any regard. And then we were like, oh, all the jobs are there. We could base ourselves here, and then we can go and travel around Asia, which we did do for the first year. We based ourselves here, and then we did, Southeast Asia and Vietnam and Cambodia and Indonesia and everything like that. And then a year turned into 2, into 3, into 4. It's the same story. If you speak to many people in the international community here, they'll often tell you that they were only supposed to be here for a year and then ended up here like 16 years later.
Are you ready to take your commitment to identity affirming education to the next level? Then join the forum, the new and exclusive membership space for the Identity Talk community. With membership tiers starting at $3 a month, you'll get early access to podcast episodes, bonus content, our Qualms Quotes monthly newsletter, and monthly live Q&A sessions. You'll also unlock discounts on workshops and products, engage in community discussions, access exclusive community and networking opportunities, and even business ad roles during episodes if you're a sponsor level member. Whether you're an ally, advocate, co conspirator, accomplice, or a sponsor, there's a place for you in the forum. So head over to identitytalk4educators.com /pricing plans /list and join the movement today. All right, cool. And you're doing a lot of great work in the media space. So I know with your journalism background, you're able to cover a lot about the Black experience within China, but I'm sure other parts of the Asian continent as well. But before I ask you about that, I'm curious to know what inspired you to want to pursue journalism and storytelling as a career path.
Yeah. I think that's quite a layered answer because it's kind of changed over the years. I think
Yeah,
originally I graduated in 2011 with a degree in film journalism and news media. And at that stage in my life, I was really very spellbound by film in general, like across genres, because for
right.
me it was like a window into the human experience, a window into the human condition. At that time, I was studying quite heavily the horror genre, and immediately I went to this idea of film being this kind of microcosm of like society and our fears and our angst and all those kinds of things, and why horror, is such a, people either run from it or flock to it. But regardless, as a genre, I was very compelled about how film in general was able to speak to who we are, right?
Yeah.
And the intricacies of who we are as human beings. And that naturally fell into a love for documentaries, because it's real life, it's the reality of the world that we're living in. And so film wasn't just like entertainment for me. It wasn't just being informed about something or being entertained in that moment, but it felt like it could be a tool for connection. It felt like it could be a tool used to better understand the world that we live in, to better understand how we relate to one another, even more so, and how we create or are not creating community. So that's how I kind of fell into journalism, through that degree, and then just my love of storytelling through film.
And you've been able to do a lot of projects over the time you've been in China. So I know you've written articles about being a Black expat in China, and I think you did a documentary as well, a short one focused around a lot of that life experience. So you're there and you're observing things that are taking place. You're also sharing these stories, but you're also a part of that experience. So how do you balance those roles, being an observer, a storyteller, and then a participant living in China as a Black expat?
Yeah, I love this question because I was able to really go back a bit. It's kind of crazy, actually, the things I've done in regard to the storytelling aspect of like what the Black experience is like in China. And I did write quite extensively on the subject and then produced a short documentary film called The Black Orient. And my personal journey regarding what it meant to be Black really came into its fullness when I moved to Asia, because for the first time I became very cognizant of my Blackness, because it was a source of curiosity, it was a source of ignorance, it was a source of at times blatant racism. And so in China I was obviously treated quite differently, but I also understood quite acutely how my accent and passport privilege, which is a thing, like really added nuance to what my experience was. And so I happen to be married to a Ghanaian man, and so we are both yeah, yeah,
Sister.
I see. Yeah. We are both we both experienced China through this, and our treatment was very racialized, this very racialized lens. However, they are very different. And I think if you speak to most Black women globally, they'll say that there are definitely some crossovers between the Black experience with Black men and Black women. But ultimately, there's a unique, the intersectionality of it all is that our
Hmm.
experiences are quite unique. And so I really was genuinely curious about the Black experience in China and what it was like for others. I was like, are they experiencing the same as me? Are they, kind of navigating the idea of, being international, but also being Black, right? And so I lost myself in this battle at the time between the perceived openness of China and Chinese people and how how I saw others being embraced, alongside like blatant anti-Black sentiment, bias, discrimination, especially in the workplace. And I even spoke to young Chinese scholars about this, about African migration, in particular in Guangzhou at the time, which had the largest African population, migrant population. I think till today they still do have the largest African migrant population, predominantly made up of Nigerians, I believe. And I wanted to kind of understand the hybridity of certain places, because in modern China, the landscape, the racial landscape, I saw shifting, right? It wasn't just like these international
Yeah.
populations, but it was like, okay, there's now these like communities where Chinese and Black folk are mixing and they're marrying and they're having families. And what does that look like? How does that shape their experience? So in that regard, it was quite easy to be an observer because those things didn't quite resonate with me, right? So I was really able to take a step back and look at things a little bit objectively, especially because I also realized that the Black experience was very different between the Black diaspora versus individuals from the continent. So
Yes.
again, passport privilege, very real. And so what I thought at the time, I don't think I'm in my 20s, right? So at the time, like, oh yeah, the Black experience is really universal. And like, there's generic kind of, thread, which in some regard there is, right? But I hadn't
Mhm.
noted what I was researching and looking into then. And I was like, oh, okay, so the Black experience is actually very nuanced and it really does depend on a lot of factors, different factors. So I thought everything would resonate with me. And then when it didn't, uh, my focus was just to explore, investigate, and then expose. So that's kind of how how I was in relation to the work that I was doing.
And there are a lot of social media influencers who document their experience living in China. Like I come across so many YouTube channels of people walking around with the phone and they're actually speaking Mandarin.
Yeah,
And you see the Chinese people look at them all funny and dumbfounded, like, how are
yeah.
you able to speak our language? And you see some of those things that you've described in your own experience. So when you see those instances, like how accurate is that? How does that mirror some of the things that you experience?
I mean, those kinds of videos are very anecdotal,
Sure.
and humorous, and they definitely speak to some of what you experience as a Black person in China. I wouldn't say I'm a massive fan of them because,
Hmm.
as we are aware, we need the full picture, the full story. And,
Yeah.
we already know the dangers of a single story. Chimamanda Adichie talks about
Hmm.
that, right? And I love that, the danger of full story of a single story. And I think a lot of those videos do project a single story. Not to say that they're bad or anything like that. They're informative and they're entertaining. Um, you know, People are always curious about me and my family. My son now speaks fluent, he's fluent in Mandarin. And so it's always very interesting to go out with this little Black Chinese boy, because essentially he says he's from China. So, which he was born here, he was born in Beijing, so essentially he is. But and it's so wonderful. What's really new for me is, because even talking to you about my experiences, right? my
Yeah.
understanding about identity and blackness and things like that, you know, within this context of being in China. And then my son's 7, so I'm already having, you know, discussions with him about these kinds of things. And it's so it amazes me to see how differently he sees the world as a third culture kid, right? Growing up in a completely different cultural environment to the one that his parents grew up in. And it just ain't that deep for him. And it's very refreshing sometimes to talk to him because everything's so deep for me.
Yes.
Everything I'm analyzing, you know what I mean? Because I come from that generation, but it's just not that deep. Mom, I'm born here, I'm Chinese, but I'm also like we've traveled quite a bit with him already. So wherever we visited, he thinks I'm also from there. So I'm born in China, and he'll say, but I'm from Thailand, I'm from Ghana, I'm from London, and I'm international. And I'm just like, wow, it was kind of like kind of moment where I was like, okay, yeah, I kind of get it. And that kind of makes sense. But you know, with anything, there's an insidious side sometimes with, you know, what it is to move around the world as a Black person,
Yeah.
especially in Asia. And so as I mentioned, the things that I've, you know, takeaways for me that I've learned or I didn't think I would come into contact with have
Mm.
been, you know, how my accent and my passport has been able to give me access and entryway into spaces that otherwise I wouldn't have had access to, and how unfair that is. But even so, having that privilege, how I've been mistreated, right? How environments have become very hostile. And being in Asia and being in China, Eurocentrism is real. They look at you, foreigners, through a very this kind of adopted Eurocentric lens.
Mm-hmm.
So Eurocentrism reigns supreme, right? That's the first thing you kind of, you know, experience as a Black person here, and that there's a lot of schooling that needs to be done. It can be quite frustrating a lot of the
Yeah.
time, but then you also realize how strong these narratives have been able to penetrate worldwide, right? Even our understanding of Africa, our understanding of Blackness, it's migrated to every corner of the world, right? And it's this that one narrative about what it means or what it is to be Black. So that's been really interesting. Um, the merging of seeing these hybrid, or I call them hybrid communities, seeing these hybrid communities of Chinese and Black families, like mixed families, and realizing that that doesn't necessarily mean that you're not going to experience hostility or anti-Blackness, even in those spaces.
Yeah.
It doesn't necessarily mean that there's a kumbaya, if I may use, my husband told me not to use that phrase anymore because it can be offensive, but it's not like, it doesn't mean all is well, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so these communities, for me, I'm just speaking of my experience, that when I'm looking at these communities, they are a product of a fascination with Blackness. And I have found in China there is a preoccupation with cosplaying Blackness while
Mm-hmm.
simultaneously displaying anti-Black sentiment.
Yep.
So those two things can go really hand in hand. It's a bizarre concoction.
Yeah. Yeah. I know it's wild. Like I've seen some examples of that, unfortunately. But you're going through all this and you have a third culture child that is muddied up in all these different identities, which is beautiful. And I mean, I have my son is 7, my oldest son, and he's pretty much been abroad for most of his life, like to the
Mm.
point where the concept of dollars and cents doesn't just come second nature to him. Like that's how
Yeah,
international he is.
exactly.
So yeah. So like you always wonder, when do you have these candid conversations with him? You know what I mean? Like about what's happening around him. Like you want him to remain innocent and just live his life and just enjoy it. But at the same time, you're always wondering, like, when?
Yes,
How do you how do
yes.
you how do you approach that conversation, and when is the best time to do that?
Oh my gosh, such a good question. It's something my husband and I are always talking about on some kind of level. For me, when I look at my son and I have these discussions, it's like I get why he thinks the way he thinks and he
That's
feels
right.
accepted. And far as he's concerned right now, he's a Chinese boy. He's a black Chinese boy. And but then I'm trying to reconcile that with the fact that I have to prepare him for when others don't see him that way, right? The problem is not going to come from him. The problem is going to be this outward, projection of otherness, right? What otherness is, or reaction response to otherness, or othering, doing othering him, and how that's what that's going to do to him psychologically, because I can only cocoon him for so long.
That's right.
And there will be moments. I'm imagining. I don't wish it on him. Of course, we don't wish these things on our children. But I'm already imagining coming home from school one day, and and sharing, a scenario with me about, someone maybe calling him the N word, or somebody saying, no, you ain't Chinese. Like you need to go back home, or whatever the case may be, and how I'm gonna broach that conversation with him. But I think when it comes to identity and affirming who our children are, we do that. We should start that very, very early. Very early. I remember Lux being as young as like 3,
Mm,
and me like talking about shades of skin and talking about what he looks like versus what mummy looks like, what daddy looks
yeah.
like. Daddy's Ghanaian, he's like slightly darker than me, and mummy's, he used to call me yellow. That's like, I'm not.
Oh,
Yeah, because
okay.
black people have this underglow, like under
Yeah.
this complexion yellowy, and daddy's dark chocolate, and I'm milk chocolate, like I'm brown
Mhm.
chocolate, right? So like having those very innocent discussions with him, and we continue to have those, but also, okay, sitting down with him and speaking about his day, how his friendships are going, if he's feeling okay, um uh you know asking him what he's noticing, if he's noticing things at all. Does he understand that he's different? What about you is different? Why do you think that is? So just being transparent and open, and being prepared and ready to answer the questions that will come your way, and also being prepared to have bold but very necessary, important conversations with our Black children.
Talk for Educators Live podcast is just one piece of the work that we do under Identity Talk Consulting, which we've had since 2019. And since then, we've had the privilege of working with 40 different schools, districts, and organizations across the globe. And we want to continue to add to that number in this new year. So if you are a school, if you're an educator or an organization that's looking to receive professional development and consulting services within any of our pillars, whether it's anti-bias, anti-racist practices, culturally responsive teaching, or identity-affirming education, we are the firm for you, and we love to learn more about your needs. When you have a chance, make sure you go to our website at identitytalk4educators.com to learn more about our services and to schedule a discovery call today. We love to hear from you.
And I think this is a perfect segue into tap in, right?
Yeah.
So we had the tap in think tank. You've been doing tap in pretty much for as long as you've been in China, and you've seen it grow since you've been there. Like the amount of work you've been able to put in and have these conversations with people within China and other parts of the Asian continent. I mean, I've been able to see it from afar, but I'm wondering, was it experiencing what you've seen with your child that inspired tap in? Or were there some other instances that ultimately told you, all right, we need to launch this think tank and really have those conversations? with the greater Black community here?
Yeah. I think on the most part, journalism shielded me a lot because it was very entrepreneurial. I was able to do things, according to my timing and my focus, my interests, and my passions. And when I had Lux, it made sense for my family for me to return back to education with my husband, as my husband was in education, doing really well. He's a business and economics teacher, and he's a fabulous teacher, better than me actually, although I'm the one that started off in education. And I went back into the classroom and just had the most horrific time, if I'm to be really transparent, just honest with you.
Yeah, please.
And I didn't understand. I didn't quite get what was happening. And it's funny for me because since doing just coming forward into now, when I look at the academic research around identity, inclusion, and belonging, things like that of that nature in international schooling, what's missing from academic literature is lived everyday experience. I don't understand why that's not a part of the dialogue, or why that's not a part of the research, why that's not a part of academic scholarly deep dive into this context that we're talking about anyway. And so really truly my experience is really what springboarded the think tank. Like you said, the think tank has always been there really, but I didn't have language. There was no language for what it was, right? Until last year. And when I had the experience, I wanted to create a platform for community building that first started with validating these experiences, right?
That's right.
And having people in the international community actively listen and share. And so the think tank is a consultancy company as well as it is an organization. So we're designing initiatives where people are entering into dialogue about their lived experience and sharing their stories with others. And really what's happening is there's an exchange going on. So there's an exchange of ideas, there's an exchange of perspectives, and it's supposed to be, the aim is that this is to be transformative for the lives of people that are involved, families, community as a whole here in Beijing. It's the first of its kind in this city. I believe it's the first of its kind in China.
Wow.
And I also wanted to provide like an access point for schools that are willing, by the way, to engage in dialogue about race, about ethnicity, about inclusion, about belonging, about employment, for Black and brown folk, and what that looks like, what our experiences are like in this field. Because with the work I'm already doing with schools, our hope is that we're highlighting and providing resources that support leaders. In particular, we work with students and parents as well, but with leaders, because leaders are the ones that set the school's temperature, the culture, the temperature of the culture in the school. So, often people think of culture as this like external entity. And I'm just like, no, it's not this outside thing on the periphery, right? That we bring into and work with it. We are the culture. We are the culture makers. We design it, we create it, all those kinds of things. And so in order to foster safe and inclusive spaces, there is internal work that needs to be done. And usually in international school settings, it's very much a trickle down effect. So the culture, the fostering of the right culture, the making of it, that's a top down thing, right? That's why leaders need to be worked with. So we need to work on our own biases. We have to understand the language and the terminology, even academic terminology. What is intersectionality? What we all know what, or I hope we all know what bias is, but how does it show up? What does it look like? How do we tackle it? How do we mitigate it? All those kinds of things. But most importantly for me in the work I do is actually, what does real allyship look like? It's a bit of a buzzword, and I have a wonderful friend that I work with, that I co-facilitate sometimes with, and she's a white Scottish lady. Shout out to Janice. She's wonderful. And she doesn't like the word ally. And I don't blame her, right? Because she's like, this is the work that we should all be doing. It's not being an ally, it's just being human. And I totally, totally get it. But some people need to work with a concept, and then they can start, that dissolves into what it means to just be, right?
Yeah.
In whatever space that you're in. And I think, a lot of people don't realize that when you're using your privilege for good, there's a level of sacrifice that happens. You're giving
Yeah.
something, right? You're giving something. There's some
Sure.
sacrifice that needs to be, right? That needs to be that you're going to experience if you're really doing the work. I think if you're not losing anything or sacrificing anything, I don't think that you're doing it right. This is personal,
That's
but
right. No,
we
I
have
agree
to.
with
Yeah, yeah.
you. Yeah.
Because I know it's a touchy thing. So I'm not casting judgment on anyone, be like, you should be doing this. But it's
Mhm.
more than, oh, you said something inappropriate. Did you know that maybe next time, like care to confront is great. We should all be caring. We should all like care enough to confront. But what else are you doing? What else? How are you mentoring, supporting, funding? Showing up, right? Showing up and showing out in all the right ways. And of course, leading with empathy and leading with compassion. But that cannot be done. Like the compassion and empathy part doesn't really happen until people educate themselves, they become more self-aware, and then
Yes.
seek out and make space for connection. And then we can build community upon that. So that's kind of the work that we're trying to do with Tapping Think Tank, and we are doing successfully. It's great. We're working with a number of international schools here in Beijing, working with parents, working with students, working with faculty. And so it's exciting to be in this space that was once very hostile ground for me. And
Mhm.
I know this is not the right time to go into that. I don't want to diverge, but my my own story very much has shaped the work that we're doing, and it's very validating to see people really prioritize this work. It's not just a buzzword, DIJB, right? It's become
Mhm.
very buzzy, but it's actually a real thing, and real people are involved in this. And it reminds me, if I may, I just want to read something out, because a friend of mine,
Go
Janice,
for
who
it.
I was just speaking about, she sent me this interview of somebody who then quoted Bell Hooks, who I love. I'm just in love with Bell Hooks.
Yeah.
And she quoted from her book, All About Love, New Visions. And it brought me, when she sent me that video, it brought me back to something that I'm actually working on. So I'm working on a new workshop called the Compassion Principle, because I think a lot of community building work has to come from the compassion principle, love,
Yeah.
before we go anywhere. And I'm just going to read from this text. It says, she says, I am especially fond of the biblical passage in the first epistle of John, which tells us there is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear, because fear has torment. He that fear is not made perfect in love. And then she goes on to say, from childhood on, this passage of scripture has enchanted me. I was fascinated by the repeated use of the word perfect. Suddenly,
Mhm.
my passage illuminated love as a process that has been refined, alchemically altered as it moves from state to state, is that perfect love can cast out fear. As we love, fear necessarily leaves. And I just think that's so beautiful, because if you
Mm.
think about our prejudices and our biases and this or hatred in general, it does always come from a place of fear. It comes from fear, and it comes from ignorance. And so if we bring in and make the core of what we do the compassion principle, love, what is it to love someone like you love yourself? I think everyone is very familiar with that notion across faiths, right? What it is to love somebody as you love yourself. And we're all familiar as well with the kind of biblical scripture on it. But I think that it's something that everybody can harness.
Yeah.
I came home the other day, and I was a bit annoyed with a neighbor, actually, who has a very different understanding of of boundaries. And I didn't realize, but I was really operating in like a state of like judgment. And I walked through my house, and I don't know why I was thinking this. So I was thinking, oh, Nick, What would it be like? What would your interactions look like with her if you loved her like you loved yourself? And I began to think about, oh, maybe she's leaning in the best way she knows how. She's leaning in a way that's culturally appropriate for her, right? She's stepping on my toes a little bit, on my comfort toes, right? But she's only trying to be a friend. She's trying to be your friend. She's trying to get to know you. And so I began to approach my interactions with her differently. I always see her when I'm dropping my son off at the bus stop. And I don't know if I'm giving her too much information.
No, it's your
but
story. I'm here.
but
If he comes for you, you gotta deal with that. Like,
well, the funny thing is, I'm a really big fan of bold conversations. I mean, I talk about having bold conversations all the time.
yes,
And I think in working in the field that I do, I have to practice what I preach. I have to do that, right? So I actually have
yeah,
had conversations where I've confronted this individual about how I feel, right? In love, but I have done that because it's something I encourage people to do. And if I can't do it, I can't be, sitting in conference rooms or workshops telling people to have bold conversations when I'm not willing to have them myself.
mm-hmm.
But what my takeaway from that really was that loving her like I love myself, there would be respect, there would be acknowledgement, there would be listening. So I'm like,
Mm.
okay, now I see her, I lean into that. A bit of kindness goes a really long way. And loving someone like you love yourself goes a really long way. Maybe it feels unusual for people to think about relationships like that, because loving people like that, you think of yourself and your family and those, close proximity to you, friends and family. But actually that love or compassion principle can transcend that if we allow it to.
Yeah, for sure. And we're going down to the home stretch here. So I have a couple more questions before we wrap up. Um, the first question is, looking back at your journey, being a consultant, being an educator, being a change agent, because that is what you are. This work you're doing is very much transformative work, and we need to acknowledge that. I'm wondering, your own
Thank
journey,
you.
what have you learned about yourself? You're welcome. And your identity that maybe you didn't expect to learn when you started this journey over a decade ago?
I love this question. I love this. And it's made me, I'm going to ponder on it some more, and I'll try my best to answer as best as I can. But in my
We don't do
early
perfection
work,
here. We don't do perfection here.
I know, I got to remind myself about
Come
that,
on.
about that. Yeah, I'm working on that. But in my early career, I would say, everyone outside of my subjects, the people that I worked with, everybody outside of my storytelling focus were just props. They were just on the periphery, right? They were just extras in the story that I'm telling. And I think recently, and I go on about this all the time, I've probably said this several times across different platforms, but I really fell in love with a book called The Dictionary of Obscure Sorrows by John Koenig, I believe.
Mhm.
And all these different words that speak to the human spirit, basically. And I came across a word called sonder. And I had this epiphany, Sonder. And I had this epiphany that everyone, everyone is living really vivid, textured, complex, sometimes painful lives, just like our own, right? And I guess that changed my approach. So now I want to speak to those lives, right? The lives like behind the windows, that are opposite our homes or opposite our apartment buildings, where you see the lights on, you see shadows, you'll see people going about their daily lives. And it's like, I kind of want to sneak into like the crevices of all these narratives, right? In the hope that if we are shedding light on everyone's story, it's just as important as our own, that we begin to realize how connected we are in a way, or at least how connected our human existence and experience is. So I think maybe that's how my storytelling has evolved over time and how I look at storytelling. And in regard to my identity, it's all about beyond borders for me. I think it's beyond borders, it's beyond territory, it's beyond regions. Now, I'm not saying that isn't a part of it. Those are identity markers, right? And they do shape us, absolutely. But what I'm saying is that, again, identity transcends those things, that we are the sum of the relationships that we have with people, how we make people feel, how we learn from others, how people learn from me. And so it's about embracing all of me, not just that single narrative about who I am. Yes, I'm a Black woman. Yes, I have Caribbean heritage. Yes, I'm married to somebody, from Ghana, and all these things are great, and they definitely shape and bring color to my life. But that's not just who I am. I'm a multitude of things.
Yes, as we all are. We're very much
Yes.
multifaceted and multidimensional. And that's what's beautiful
Yes.
about this idea of identity and intersectionality, is the fact that we are muddy when it comes to the different things that make up who we are. Now, yes, for sure. Now, I got the final question, which I ask everybody on this podcast. It's the big one here. How do you stay true to the teacher in you?
Always model compassion. Always model empathy. It needs to be seen. We need to see it. Our children need to have a visual of that and to feel it as well. And keep what I call the human element alive by remembering and embracing our collective humanity. Our collective humanity is paramount. Everything else is just window dressing. It's things that is decoration. But remembering that we're human in all of our interactions.
All right. And that's a beautiful way to end this conversation. Nicole, thank you so much for taking time to talk with us today. And before I let you go, please, please, please let people know how they can tap in with you, pun intended.
I love that pun.
Social media, so they can support what you're doing.
Yeah. Excellent. So I got 2 Instagram handles. So Talks on Tap is actually one of the initiatives that we run under Tapping Think Tank, where we host 30-minute lectures across Beijing, in Beijing bars across the city. It's very cool. And so you can reach me at Tap Into Talks, INTO in the middle, Tap Into Talks. And then also you can find us at Tapping Think Tank as well on Instagram. We do have a website, tappinthinktank.com. And I think everyone should be able to find me on LinkedIn through this platform, your platform. Or after listening to this, I think you'll have that handle there.
I mean, quite frankly, you don't need any help from me. I mean, the work you're doing, you really don't need any help from me, if I'm going to be honest. But yes, they can definitely tap in with you through this podcast and just through some of the other creative outlets you've put out there. But thank you, Nicole, and thank you, everybody, for tuning in to another episode of Identity Talk Educators Live. And as always, wish you a good morning, good afternoon, good night, wherever you are in the world. And we're going to do this again another time. Peace out, everybody.